why I say this. To me, it is important ASEAN take a proactive role because China is rising. There are people who said China rise bring a lot of prosperity, but there are some who said, be careful, China will change the rule of the game, including trade and commerce. So, but ASEAN also count on dialogue partners such as India to help ASEAN centrality navigate through this very difficult thing. So the more as India play a more active role in ASEAN centrality, I think we can hope to send a message to China to make sure that when they say China rise is peaceful, it is indeed peaceful. Thank you very much.
May I just interject, Professor? Certainly India would like to play that role about upholding the principle of centrality of ASEAN. But when there are clear differences within ASEAN itself on key issues, as we know, you referred to 2-3 major issues just now. I think there is just no meeting ground among ASEAN. In a situation like this, what kind of role a dialogue partner, including India, can play?
Yes, can I make quick? Very good. Last year was a 50-year anniversary, and I traveled quite a bit to different parts of ASEAN capital. A lot of these issues, particularly the division, the ASEAN unity, up until now, ASEAN agreed to disagree on a few things already. So unity, it depends on which way you look at it. On the South China Sea issues, how you address these issues, you can forget about ASEAN unity. Sorry to say, if you really want to stick to ASEAN unity, you will not get it. PCA, Cambodia, my country, decide not to make any, say that this is between China and Philippines. It's very clear we want to be neutral. This is how Cambodia view it, neutrality. It just let the two most direct party to sort things out. And that's what it is. But many countries follow suit. Nobody make any statement on the PCA. A joint statement, for example, you don't have it. So this explain unity. It's no longer there. You look at Rohingya issues. ASEAN, you look at Malaysia's now, what the chair statement of the Malaysia with regard to, they said that the chairman's statement of Burma can go, but Malaysia don't, it's not abide by that. So this is another unity in disunity, so to speak. So I hope I understood you.
Professor Ghoshal.
I think on this question of ASEAN centrality, I'll just make one sentence. It will depend to a large extent on the unity within ASEAN. Even some ASEAN countries are also questioning on the question of this centrality. So, this is where I brought in this concept of an Asian Quad. Essentially because India was operating all these years, essentially through either ASEAN or through East Asia Summit. But because of these complications, it has become difficult for India to really push through some of these things through either of these two organizations. And that's why I was trying to put forward a separate formation where there are a lot of commonalities. All the 4 countries that I mentioned, India, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Japan, contribute to the concept of Indo-Pacific. All the 4 countries believe in the unity of the 2 oceans, Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, which is going to be very critical in terms of the security things. Then future security issues will come from maritime issues, not so much the land. So again, the 4 countries have a certain common approach towards the maritime issues, and there is a lot of maritime cooperation going on between these 4 countries. And one of the things that is weakness of, India as well as some of these countries vis-a-vis China is economic weaknesses. And this is where I brought in Japan, that Japanese presence within this thing, in the new formation, might give a boost to, inter these four countries, trade and investment, and also they can also join production in terms of manufacturing. India can also invest on manufacturing in some of this. So this is where the issue, I thought that this could be another formation. This is not the only one. There are a whole lot of other formations. Now, to answer your question about the US, where does US come in? Now, irrespective of the Quad, US will remain a power in the region because of the very fact about US being a superpower. Now, why I sort of, said that the Quad, other Quad, because any problem where America comes in, China gets upset about the whole thing. So if there is the Asian formations, China can, at least China's opposition to this can be minimized. And that is why I thought this could act as another to synchronize foreign and defense security, economic and other sort of policies of these four countries. Thank you.
One is Mr. Nalin Kohli.
Thank you, Chair. Nalin Kohli, I represent knowledge industry sector in India. And this is a question for Professor Din. So I found from your statistics that many strong areas of our economy which have recently emerged in the last, I would say, decade, are just not represented in the Indo-ASEAN trade. Particularly IT, for example, software. We do more than $150 billion of software export. And China acknowledges us as a superior power in software as compared to them. So I think this needs to be exploited. I was happy to see on the FDI there was some software investment coming from your country. But in terms of exploring, where we can work together, we offer some of the lowest cost software solutions. Of course, we don't export them. They're mainly more for the Indian consumption. But there could be strong cooperation there. Similarly, two more sectors which have emerged very recently. Defense, we were the largest importers in the world. There's a major thrust in Indian industry now to indigenize. I think earlier we also were not looking at defense exports. Now we are quite open to that idea as a country. I think there has been some doctrine shift there. So that's another area we can cooperate. And the third area where I think we can offer you something very unique, which the other country we are compared to cannot do, is cooperation in small and medium enterprises, where we can offer technology, consulting to build small and medium enterprises. And I think this could be another area which can be explored. But I didn't see it in the statistics, so I thought all of them are virgin areas as of today.
Okay, thank you. I think that the areas you mentioned are very important because we have just developed these areas in very recent years, not very long ago. So these are the beginning that we think we may expand the cooperation. We have sent some companies investment in some African countries, and they are successful. We start to have some cooperation with India, but the level is not very high yet. And I think the areas you mentioned, like software, defense, or SME, I agree with you. But there are even other areas that we can cooperate between Vietnam and India, especially the experience between the two countries about the reforms. Up to now, we think that the Indian reform is 15 years after Vietnam, but it's growing quickly, and it's more market-oriented than in Vietnam. Vietnam is moving toward the market. But it seems in the mind of the people it's still slow. So we are thinking of a new round of reform in Vietnam. One area that both countries may discuss about the way of cooperation in promoting the reforms between the two countries as well. So I think that there are many different areas, not just a few areas. But it takes time because Vietnam is a small economy, and we follow what we call the gradual approach. So it takes time for the mind of the people to change before we take the action. I think the same like India, you take the look east before you say acting east. It takes some gradual approach. We do not follow the big bang approach like Russia or some East European countries. We change quickly. So in the case, the different areas may move up time after time. Thank you.
Thank you. Philip Vermonte from Indonesia. This is also a question for Professor Do. If I read your slides correctly, Professor Do, Doc, if I read your slides correctly, it seems that you are saying that India is more protectionist than ASEAN countries in general, but at the same time, India suffers such a huge trade imbalance with ASEAN countries. So how would you explain this? If it is Donald Trump, India would go around and punish the ASEAN countries because of the trade imbalances. And second, my question to Professor Gosal, on the Quad, ASEAN Quad that you are mentioning, how would you think the other ASEAN countries would respond? Because it resembles the so-called ASEAN minus X mechanism, because you only bring in 2 of ASEAN countries, but somehow the ASEAN minus X mechanism does not apply to political cooperation. In the ASEAN Charter, it is there for economic cooperation, but for the political cooperation, I would guess that the reaction by the other ASEAN countries would be very suspicious about that kind of proposal. Although it's a very interesting proposal, but I think there are complications, not to mention the reaction from China as well. Thank you. Oh, lastly, thank you for bringing the anthropological aspects of ASEAN-India relations, because we, I think, for so many times look at the cooperation from the strategic perspective, not from the cultural anthropological perspective. And what's missing, I think, probably in this conference as well, if we are talking about the way ahead, I'd like to remind everybody around the table that we have a very young population in Southeast Asia. Close to 70% of population in Indonesia is under 40 years old. So they are, I don't know about India, I suspect it's the same. So they are the ones with more, they are technologically savvy, so to speak, population. And the consequences of which we don't understand. The economic, the digital economy and so on, which China has been doing very well. And China seems to me well prepared to enter that era compared to most of us in ASEAN as well as in India, I think.
So just 2 things after this conference for perhaps future reflection. First is, I guess, India and ASEAN and others will have to think what are the political implications of rise of China. One clear implication that I see that it is affecting the unity within regional organizations as they existed. And there are several. Now, is it happening by design? Is it happening by accident? That is for each organization to reflect upon. Second, here one heard this concept of historical claims vis-a-vis the established global order, which is rule-based. Personally, I think we should all, academicians, banish this idea of historical claims, which has very little salience. Because once we talk of nation states, and especially where would these historical claims stop? Will it stop with one island? Will it extend to land? And India and ASEAN, which are linked by historical and civilizational links, I guess it will open a Pandora's box. Each one of us will have claims on each other, extending right up to I don't know where. So I think it is best to banish this thought from global discourse as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Quickly, please.
I would like to first say I do not say that India is more protection, but in practice, India tax rate is much higher than ASEAN countries. So with the free trade area agreement, the Indian government accepted to reduce over 90% of the tax rates. That's why the trade between the two economies of ASEAN and India is much better. So that's something I do not say about protection, but I say that the difference. So it is more convenient today. The second is that, for example, Indian is moving with the reform. And one of the difficulties is that the privatization of the state enterprises. They are so much subsidized, they do not want to change because they get more subsidies and they do not work hard. They just get from that. We have the same thing in Vietnam. We do not use the word privatization like India. We use equitization because we feel it's difficult to get the subsidies reduced for the people who already got high subsidies. So that's the difficulties. So in that case, I think that in India you have a dynamic private sector, but at the same time you have some sectors that, because of the history, that it takes time to reduce, to make it more convenient for business, like some ASEAN countries, that they do not have the subsidized sector like as big as Vietnam and India, or they do not have such a big centralized planning management. So thank you.
You know, when I spoke about this Asian Quad, I didn't mean it as a kind of a alliance kind of a thing. It's a kind of a caucus kind of a thing, a formation where they can coordinate some of their foreign and defense and economic policies. And, you know, I know ASEAN may not like this kind of things, but since it is not part of ASEAN, it is a separate kind of a thing that I've been talking about, a kind of a sort of, informal discussions among these four countries, because, within ASEAN it becomes difficult for someone to talk about certain issues. Now, outside ASEAN, it is much easier to talk on these issues. And I'm not involving, that's why, the Western countries. It's among only the Asian countries. If, US and other countries are present, then of course it becomes a difficult kind of a situation. Thank you.
Well, we have already gone into about 15, 20 minutes of our lunch hour. Oh, almost half an hour, I think. What remains for me to do is to thank our distinguished panelists for their excellent presentations by acclamation. And over to Dr. Prabir Dey.
Sir, thank you very much. Excellent session. So we break for lunch and come back at 1:45. Enjoy the lunch. Thank you, sir. Please.